Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and we are happy to have you with us here today. Two great guests. Terrence Edwards stops by, Jake Fromm stops by, some high praise for Georgia and the distance between itself and the rest of the other national championship contenders, at least based on perception. As we get ready to begin the 2024 season, we will talk about that on the show. And if you're a UGA fan, you're going to love what one Georgia player has said about a new Georgia player coming in to be one of his teammates here, the sort of selfless attitude that you want involved in a program like UGA, kind of on full display here today. And I think it's one of the things that makes this a truly special program. We'll talk about that. And that actually is going to lead me into what I think is a little bit of maybe a crackpot theory, but in terms of one slight change that Georgia might be able to make that could make a big impact on the field here for this season. I will let you tell me if you think this is a good idea or not, and we'll get ready to do it here right now. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Before our show begins on all platforms, one of the things we'll do at DawgNation.com, we call it our First and 15. It's 9:45 in the morning. It involves comments on our DawgNation homepage, our DawgNation app. It's just a little bit of early extra content as a lead-in to our show. And people can ask whatever they want to ask, and I'll pretty much respond to sort of whatever in a situation like that. A moment ago, somebody brought up pro wrestling, gave me a chance to talk about one of my favorite pastimes here. Not everybody loves it when I talk about wrestling, but I do like wrestling. I've always liked wrestling, and so kind of a fun thing to be able to have that conversation. The point I'm getting to, though, is that when my kids came along, I was sort of hoping they would really like wrestling because it would give me a chance to sort of sort of get a little deeper into something I've always liked, but as you get older, you sort of get busy. Maybe you don't really feel like you should be spending that much time around a somewhat sort of silly pastime or whatever else. And if your kids are involved in it, well, that sort of gives you an excuse to do as much of that as you want to. But the truth is, I have never really had either of my two kids get all that much into wrestling. I still probably like it more than either of them do. They like it a little bit, but maybe not always as much as I would want them to. That's just not really quite their thing. And ultimately, while I sort of wish it was different, I'm kind of okay with it. But when it comes to something else like, say, football, and in our case, college football, I am very, very thankful that my son in particular is as into college football as he is. Wrestling, I'd like for him to be into it, but ultimately I don't really care. Football, I think there is something kind of important about choosing to follow football, pay attention to football, and get as close to that sport as you possibly can. In fact, not to be too corny or take things to a deeper level than they need to go, I think there is probably a reason our society values football as much as we do. We may not know how to articulate that necessarily, but there is something about football that goes beyond just, well, it's a good diversion, it's a good entertainment, it's something to bet on, or whatever sort of surface level thing people might see there. There seems to be a little something deeper going on when it comes to football, that it sort of brings about things about life that are not always super easy to articulate, but perhaps pretty important to understand. And so therefore, when my kids gravitate towards football, I think that's actually a good thing. And there are some life lessons that you could take from kind of getting a little closer to the sport. And I'll tell you what causes me to think that. Our friends over at the Players Lounge, who were kind of involved in the University of Georgia from an NIL standpoint in some form, some fashion, they put out a quote a couple of days ago on Instagram from Georgia running back Roderick Robinson that I think is really pretty neat. And it's a little bit commonplace to see Georgia players saying this. We've gotten used to running backs, in fact, in some respects, saying this across maybe all levels of the sport. And yet at the same time, I don't think the kind of commonplace nature of statements like this, especially at Georgia, ought to cause us to overlook how selfless it is, how I think special that it is, and how much it demonstrates the sort of connection player to player that has supposedly made Georgia so special over the course of the last couple of years, and one of the reasons why I think Kirby Smart believes that Georgia's been able to have the national championship success that it's been able to have. Let me show you this on the screen if you're watching video, and if you're listening radio podcast, I'll read it to you. The Players Lounge sharing this quote from Roderick Robinson on Trevor Etienne coming into the program. Robinson saying, "I feel like God brings everyone where they are for a reason. We welcomed him with open arms. To be the best, you're going to play with the best as well. And I just feel like he's going to elevate all of our games at the same time. We're all just going to get better from it." That's what Roderick Robinson says about Trevor Etienne coming in from Florida. Now, the subtext of all this is there is obviously another way in which you could think about this. If you're Roderick Robinson, you could think, I've been waiting for my turn. I've been waiting for my carries. Last year I watched Kendall Milton and DawgNation Edwards get a lot of those. Now it's my time, and I'm sort of ready to do my thing. And in some respects, I'm sure Robinson probably does feel that way. Obviously, he's a human being like the rest of us, and we would all perhaps think that way at least just a little bit. And it would be, once again, human nature to be tempted to be a little, who is this Trevor Etienne guy coming here to try to take what I've been waiting my turn for? And who's this guy who was at Florida going to kind of come in here and try to steal some glory, steal some attention, steal some snaps, steal some touches? Who is this guy to do this? There could be, it would be human nature, it would be natural to have a little bit of a rivalry between players in a position group. And then sometimes in sports, that sort of happens. But not at Georgia, and not when it comes to running backs. Apparently, Roderick Robinson's statement there, I think, is a pretty strong one, that he believes that Georgia is made better by having a guy like Etienne here, and therefore, if you're Roderick Robinson, I play for Georgia, why wouldn't I want Georgia to be better, even if it comes at some of the expense of the individual glory I might be able to get? Now, there's also kind of like the practical reality of running backs like other running backs, because it keeps them from having to take, and shoulder too much of a load, and we get that. But still, there's a pretty strong team concept on display. I think it says something kind of cool about Georgia. And I also think it says, as I mentioned a moment ago, something sort of cool about football overall, that if you really watch football closely enough, long enough, you're going to see lots of the best of what life has to offer. And men at their best, college football sort of makes men growing into full-fledged men being at their best. I think a lot of times that's really what football puts on display. I think Roderick Robinson is an example of that. Now, we also talked the other day about one dude from CBS Sports who kind of talked about the way in which a guy like Roderick Robinson, we would say, Branson Robinson and others have a chance to be this too. But for now, we're talking about Roderick. A guy like Roderick could sort of be the classic cliche, the duo, the thunder and lightning, that Robinson might provide that thunder for Georgia this year. The tough, hard yards, the runs in between tackle. And a guy like Trevor Etienne, who's shown some speed, who has some athleticism, he could sort of be that lightning version of a Georgia running back, which, frankly, over the course of the last couple of years, maybe Georgia hasn't always had that archetype of player. That a guy like Roderick Robinson could be the thunder, Trevor Etienne could be the lightning, and that could create a pretty interesting pairing for Georgia at the running back spot. I believe that's true. And if you'll allow me to kind of move the conversation forward just for a minute, I also think that it sort of opens up a discussion of, well, what exactly should the offensive profile for Georgia be? And if you look at, like, the one problem that kind of loomed for Georgia in terms of why it didn't go for 3-23 and why it didn't win a third straight national championship, I think the one sort of lingering kind of issue from the 2023 season was an offense that was among the best in the country. There are only a small handful of teams that scored 40 points per game, only two of those in the SEC, and Georgia was one of them. So Georgia was one of the most successful offenses in America this past season, and yet the full firepower of that offense didn't quite show up in the SEC championship loss to Alabama. Georgia was held underneath 30 points in that particular game. Some of that can be sort of explained by, well, you didn't have a healthy Brock Bowers and you didn't have a healthy Ladd McConkey. But Georgia's not like Ohio State and Alabama, programs who've sort of made their whole personality whining about injuries. Georgia's not really like that. Georgia's a lot more willing to kind of look introspectively and sort of see what could be fixed about what kept Georgia from showing its full offensive firepower in a game like that. And so since we're talking about running backs and what Etienne could be alongside a guy like Roderick Robinson and how other running backs like Branson Robinson, Andrew Paul, and the incoming freshman could supplement all of that, it kind of got me thinking a little bit about how the running back position fits overall into what Georgia does offensively. And is there something that Georgia could do with how it sort of distributes the football to perhaps prevent a game like Alabama in December where your offense just doesn't quite show up to the full extent it had in previous games? And this is a little bit of a crackpot theory. I totally get that. And maybe this doesn't make as much sense to all of you as it maybe does to me, but I want to kind of lay this out and see if you think I might be onto something here a little bit in terms of, what we might be able to see from Georgia offensively. And as a way of setting this up, I want to go back to something we did on the show a couple of days ago. Do you remember, was it Monday, Tuesday, whatever day it was? All these days start to run together a little bit. We were talking about, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, the former Georgia receiver, getting praise from Mel Kiper as one of those ESPN podcasts. And Mel's kind of laying all this out about, Rosemy-Jacksaint can do this, he can do that, do this. And Field Yates, the other draft analyst who's on the show, offered a little bit of an explanation for, well, if Rosemy-Jacksaint's this kind of draft prospect, the kind of guy that could be taken maybe even second day of the NFL draft on that Friday, then how come we didn't see more of that from a statistical standpoint at Georgia? And in making that statement, Field Yates about Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, I think he got into an interesting description of what Georgia is offensively overall. So as a way of kind of having this conversation, can I go back in time here for a second and let you hear again what Field Yates said in a clip we played the other day? Here's the ESPN draft analyst on both Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint and the Georgia offense.
Yeah, and Mel, I don't think this was a case in the case of Rosemy-Jacksaint of a guy not putting it all together in college, because the truth about playing at Georgia is twofold. One, you got to be patient, right? Just a couple of years ago, George Pickens, a second-round wide receiver, and even during the past couple of years, obviously Brock Bowers, the best tight end in the country, one of the best players amongst all pass catchers in the country. Ladd McConkey, obviously a big factor in that offense as well. And don't forget, the top two Georgia running backs this season, Mel, combined for 27 rushing scores. So there wasn't going to be nearly as much passing game production in this offense because so often Georgia was just running the football and beating you with defense, probably contributed to that lower total catch number for Rosemy-Jacksaint compared to what you might expect.
So when we did this topic on the show the other day, my big takeaway was, okay, well, if you want to highlight Georgia wide receivers a little bit better, then you just need more passing touchdowns. Georgia doesn't always have tons of passing touchdowns. They were just they were 18th in America this past season at 29 passing touchdowns. That's not in keeping with some of the other offensive stats they kind of put out. So if you want to showcase wide receivers a little bit better, then you probably need more passing touchdowns to be able to do that. But once again, thinking a little bit more deeply about this and sort of bringing the running backs into the discussion, it kind of got me thinking about the overall makeup of how Georgia has produced the offensive success that it's enjoyed, including last year in the 2023 season. Can I give you a couple of stats here for a moment? And I want to overwhelm you with this, but I want to try to see if we can speak about this in a way that makes sense to everybody. Field Yates there says, boy, you look at the overall rushing touchdown numbers that Georgia puts up. One of the reasons why a guy like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint ends up with lesser stats than he possibly could have had. And the numbers are actually even more profound than what Field Yates described there. When I looked at this, I was a little bit surprised. Georgia led the country this past season with 40 rushing touchdowns. Nobody in America had more rushing touchdowns than Georgia had this past year, and it was 40 in total. By comparison, Georgia only had 29 passing touchdowns. That was 18th best in the country. Now, when you think about the overall, I guess, caricature that gets drawn of Georgia, that's kind of in keeping with what people sort of expect from UGA. This is, in the minds of some, sort of a mentally, physically tough, sometimes run-first style team, and they don't value the passing game quite as much. And so, therefore, to a lot of people, it makes sense that Georgia has almost twice as many rushing touchdowns as it does passing touchdowns, 40 compared to 29. But the actual truth of Georgia offensively is a little bit different than that. When you look at a different metric, such as plays of 20 or more yards, passing plays of 20 or more yards, rushing plays of 20 or more yards, the actual stats are almost inverted, whereas Georgia was number 6 last year in America, 6th best in America in passing plays of 20 or more yards. It's 65 passing plays of 20 or more yards, good for 6th best in America, but only 40th best in rushing plays of 20 or more yards. So what does all this mean? Let me see if I can explain this. If you sort of close your eyes and got a picture of what Georgia football is, it's a team that passes its way down the field and then rushes for touchdowns. And if you think about it, doesn't that sort of feel like what it is? A team that marches down the field with effective passing plays, 65 plays of 20 or more yards. But then when they get down there near the scoring area, you can call it the red zone or just outside the red zone, whatever else. At that point in time, the rushing game sort of takes over. Georgia had more rushing touchdowns than anybody else. Now, however you kind of get there, very few teams in America were better at scoring overall than Georgia was. But what if you reverse these stats here a little bit, or perhaps you sort of balanced these stats out a little bit more? I told you the other day that I think that Georgia might benefit from a few more passing touchdowns. And if Georgia threw for more touchdowns, it stands to reason they wouldn't rush for 40 touchdowns because some of those would now be touchdowns through the air. But if it was a little bit more balanced, wouldn't that make Georgia perhaps a little bit more difficult to stop? And isn't the same thing potentially true when it comes to these plays of 20 or more yards? You love Georgia having 65 passing plays of 20 or more yards. You perhaps don't want less than that. But if Georgia could, somewhere sort of inside the 20s, from 20 to 20, kind of the middle portion of the field, if they could be a little bit better at producing big-time explosive runs, if they could find more than 20 rushing plays of 20 or more yards this upcoming season, wouldn't that also make Georgia a little bit more difficult to stop? In other words, we saw a truly great Georgia offense this past season. Explosive, 40 points per game. Few teams in America were better. But in terms of the overall makeup of how Georgia got to 40, did that contribute to the fact that Georgia became a little too easy for Alabama to stop in the game that mattered most? And what if there was a little bit more equity or balance between Georgia's passing touchdowns and its rushing touchdowns and its explosive plays of 20 or more yards between the pass and the run? If Georgia was a little bit more balanced in both those categories, would that perhaps prevent Georgia from having the sort of offensive performance against Alabama where it seems like they didn't show up to the same level they had for most of the regular season? I'm not quite so sure there's definitive proof one way or another, but it is an interesting thing to consider. When you look at what Georgia creates in terms of explosives, far more passes than runs. What it creates in terms of its touchdowns, far more rushes than throws. What would more balance mean for the Georgia offense? I think that's a question worth exploring as we head towards the 2024 season. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us. We're live on video 10 a.m. across all video platforms, on the radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts, wherever you find them. Just really so thankful that you found DawgNation Daily here today. And we really appreciate our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make it all possible. Taking good care of you during a challenging time, that is what Merriweather and Tharp is all about. And for a long time, you've heard us call them your source for Georgia divorce. One of the ways in which that's true is the fact that Merriweather and Tharp is expanding its services all across the state to really meet with you during a time of need. Savannah, coming soon in Athens, really working hard to make sure they are as available for you as possible no matter where you happen to be across our great state. That's why you need to visit their website, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. And one of the things I think you'll encounter when you have a free initial consultation with one of those Merriweather and Tharp attorneys, or just sort of acquaint yourself with their offerings by perusing their website, one of the ways I think that you'll experience them is the fact they are very forward-thinking in terms of anticipating your concerns and really kind of creating something that maybe meets your need before you even know that it's a need. And one of the ways that shows up in how you pay for the divorce process. There's obviously some cost associated with this, and perhaps that's one of the things that fills you with anxiety. You maybe now realize that divorce is an unavoidable reality in your life, and I think one of your big questions might be, well, how am I going to pay for this exactly? Well, that's where our friends at Merriweather and Tharp can offer you a little bit of cost certainty here and sort of explain to you that there are a lot of options they can provide that give you a way of knowing exactly what this is going to cost you. In fact, if you feel like your situation's not too complicated, pretty straightforward, there's a DIY option for Merriweather and Tharp that can cost you as low as $99. They've also got the M&T assisted model, which can be as low as $1,749. And the most popular service offering they have right now is what they call their model M&T, which is like a payment plan situation. You get it as a subscription, sort of paying monthly as your divorce process is ongoing, or a flat fee if you'd rather do that. Just lots of creative ways to give you the cost certainty you need to take care of one of the most challenging situations you perhaps have ever faced And Meriwether and Tharp wants to walk with you on your side as you go through all of this. So please find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's the website, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. Now, we've got Terrence Edwards here coming up in just a moment. We also have another great special guest coming up today, Jake Fromm, later on. Really good stuff coming up with Jake about some of his former Georgia teammates in the Super Bowl on Sunday. Jake's got some great stories to tell about all of that, and we will get to that then. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today. And this is an interesting time of year when some of the early statistical work previewing the upcoming season starts to come out. There's a man named Bill Conley who's kind of an analytics expert for ESPN.com. Some of the math nerd stuff doesn't quite, mean as much to me anymore as it maybe does to some other people, but it's still interesting to hear a lot of these statistician types talking about their reasoning. And the thing that Conley's famous for is a ratings formula called SP+, where you look at teams on kind of a per play basis and sort of how they compare to the teams that they're playing, and the makeup of the team in terms of the overall talent level and their sort of previous track record for success and things like that. And you sort of create a sort of a mathematical formula that gives you an idea of which teams are better than others. And Georgia, it may not surprise you, is number one in the SP Plus ratings to begin the 2024 season here. And Conley went on the Paul Feinbaum show this week and talked about the fact that not only is Georgia number one, but as he explains it, kind of number one by a fairly wide margin. This is what the math guy said on Paul Feinbaum here this week.
When my SP Plus projections come out tomorrow, Georgia's going to be a distant number one in the country, about 4 points ahead of Ohio State in second place. I guess that's another spoiler. But 10 after that, you're looking at Texas as about number 4. So you're going to look at Alabama and Ole Miss in the top 10, Missouri, LSU. Those teams are going to be pretty close. I think the most interesting thing to me is, we kind of know the pecking order at the top. It makes perfect sense that Georgia's 1 and Texas is 2. But after that, it really, you could make a case for many, many, many different teams for that number 3 spot, including Texas A&M. If you think that a first-year coach can really kind of get that, that whole situation wrangled in a way that Jimbo Fisher couldn't. Tennessee, if the blue chip quarterback steps up, there are going to be a lot of top 15 SEC teams in that top 15.
So a couple of points about what Bill Conley...
When my SP Plus projections come out tomorrow.
We can take, a couple of points about what Bill Conley has to say there. Thing number one is, I think it's interesting that, as he explains it from his math formula standpoint, there's a lot more data about who's underneath Georgia and who's the stiffest contenders to Georgia than there is about Georgia itself. Number one by a wide margin. Now, ultimately, I don't know how much comfort that gives UGA fans. Okay, this guy's calculator says Georgia's great, but it still has to be proven on the field. That's, I think, what most Georgia fans' response to all that would be. But let me give you one more way of thinking about this. And this is why I think that, perhaps should be really optimistic and excited about the upcoming season and the new format that's going to be in place for the college football playoff as we get ready to introduce this brand new season. I would suggest there's never been a better year to be on paper the best team. That when there's a 14 playoff, it can be easy to, you have one trip up, you can be excluded. Or it can be easy with just sort of the craziness of the bottleneck as you try to make the playoff to kind of get lost in the shuffle, or there bad luck happens, things like that. But a 12-team playoff, being the best team on paper, being statistically the most impressive team, the toughest team to beat, all of a sudden now that gets a much better opportunity to actually be measured on the field one way or another, and you can't be excluded because of some sort of boardroom conversation. You got to be beaten on the field. And in future years, when that team is Georgia, who's apparently on paper mathematically the best, it's going to be a lot harder to beat them on the field than it is to beat them in the boardroom. So if Georgia really is as good in comparison to its competition as Bill Conley says that it is, then Georgia would stand to greatly benefit from the 12-team playoff. And overall, that's one of the reasons why I think Georgia fans should be so excited about the new season that's on its way. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. As we told you, 2 great guests for us on the program here today. Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, coming up later on. But for now, one of the most respected voices around all of Georgia football, a guy who always has very interesting things to say. It's Terrence Edwards, the record-setting Georgia legend at wide receiver, joining us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So Terrence Edwards joins us here now, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And, Terrence, I don't know that either one of us would sort of categorize ourselves as mathematicians necessarily. By the way, is that a Terrence Edwards Academy logo you're sporting on the shirt there? How about that? Terrence got some merch now. I'm guessing there may be a website people can go if they want to show that off themselves, or do you have to be an official member of the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy to wear? I love the number 8, by the way, on the dog collar there. Throwback to the jersey number there at UGA. Is this the kind of thing that anybody can get, or do you have to be a wide receiver to wear it?
No, anybody can get this. You just, DM me on my social media, and I could get you a Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy shirt. And I've been had these, so these are not new. I just happened to wear it today.
I like that. Well, I can't wait to get the package delivered here to DawgNation World headquarters with my own Terrence Edwards Wide. Although right. I don't think my shirt on me would look as good as yours does on you. It's because to your credit, not every former football player is like this. But to your credit, you still look like a wide receiver. A lot. No names, but there are a lot of, former wide receivers that when you see them 20, 30 years later, perhaps they don't quite look like they would have played wide receiver. They look more like they would have played maybe a different position. But to your credit, you still kind of have the wide receiver build. I, of course, do not.
So that's the people talked about my build as a player being 170, 75 pounds. So now 25 years later, I am almost 200 pounds, but, people now who's 30 pounds heavier, they look like linebackers, but I still look like I could play. I still play basketball a lot. So, I look like a receiver now because I've gained 30 pounds since my playing days.
So I didn't quite realize this. Did you play at 175?
Yeah, that was in college, probably my playing weight, and in my professional ranks, I was around 182, 185.
Was it harder? Because, obviously the thought is, well, getting off the line of scrimmage, things like that. If you're going up, Georgia loves these 200-pound defensive backs. That if somebody's got that little bit of extra muscle, that's going to be, perhaps a tough battle to win the line of scrimmage. Did you find it difficult to play, or did you enjoy, being light enough that you could run past people?
One thing about my build is I was very strong for my size.
Yeah.
So that having a bigger guy up there didn't bother me because I was strong enough to get off press man. I was quick enough and fast enough to use all the tools in my tool belt. That is a wide receiver reference right there, B. I just stuck it in there.
I love it. I love to see it for sure. And nice, if you're watching a video, nice shot of Terrence Edwards back playing for the Georgia Bulldogs. What I meant to start our conversation with, though, was the analytics people out there saying, Georgia's not just number one. They are a clear number one. They are far ahead of anybody else the upcoming season. And as I said, I don't know how much comfort Georgia fans take from that. I think UGA sort of expects to be near the top, and whether it's someone's opinion or someone's calculator or whatever, you kind of get there. Like, what does it do for you to have the math guy say, oh my gosh, Georgia on paper, so much better right now than anybody else? Does that do much for you right now?
It doesn't. It doesn't do a lot for the player. I think Kirby has done a great job in curving those expectations and let everyone know that they're not as good as the people on the outside think they are. So he does a great job of keeping those guys very humble and willing to work. I think that's more for the outside, the fans' perspective, to get excited about that. But as a former player, we understand that the work that comes along with those expectations.
Do you agree with what I've said, that if Georgia really is the best, and by the way, in future years, whether it's Georgia or somebody else, that whoever the best team is going to benefit from a 12-team playoff, that we're going to have more instances moving forward where an expanded playoff is going to really demonstrate the true most talented team, as opposed to the sort of, random occurrence where, a team like Georgia gets excluded from the playoff or whatever else, that to be the best on paper, that the future playoff format expanded, more games in the field, more chance to sort of compare teams in terms of how they perform against each other head-to-head, that this is a good format if you really are the best team, because the expanded playoff is going to really truly demonstrate who the better team is in a way that the sort of 4-team playoff and, at-large teams getting excluded, the way the previous format sort of didn't.
All right, I agree. I think they're like this year, I think there were 6 teams that could actually won the national championship. I think a loaded Florida State team with the Georgia teams could have had opportunity to win those games as well. But now you add 12 teams and you can really see who's the best football team. There's a lot of times where teams get hot late in the season. There's a lot of times where injury plays a part of it, a la Florida State. So you really get to see who the best teams. And also I think it also leads to teams like Georgia who plays Alabama and Texas, I think, on the road. And if we go in and don't win those two games and it's very close, I still think there's an opportunity for us to get into the playoff still, because I don't think there'll be 12 better teams than a two-loss Georgia team, and lose to a team like Texas or Alabama. That committee still would put us in. So you got a lot of room to wiggle more, in my opinion, especially if you start off one of those top 1 or 2 teams.
No, I think that's really interesting. I also talked before you joined us about what Roderick Robinson had to say about Trevor Etienne. Now, I want to get more deeply into what Robinson said in a moment, but just overall, I mean, how valuable do you think, not just the SEC experience of Etienne, but the fact that he has been described as explosive, he is sort of thought to be a little bit of a speedier option at running back than sometimes maybe Georgia has had here. What do you think that Trevor Etienne coming over from Florida, what do you think he can bring to the Georgia offense?
I think exactly what you just said. He's going to bring that explosiveness and downfield speed that we didn't have last year. I don't think we have had that since James Cook. And I also don't think we have had that running back out the backfield that could catch the football on the swing routes, on the tunnels. I think we really missed Kenny McIntosh last year because he was able to be used as a receiver out of the backfield, just like James Cook. And I think Etienne can bring that portion of the game as well. But if you just go look at his Florida days, he is a very explosive running back. And I think he's going to bring that real speed in the backfield, along with Nate Frazier, along with Dwight Phillips, that we haven't had in the last, especially last year.
And listen, I know this may sound sort of corny or whatever else, but I do like it when a guy like Roderick Robinson is glad to have a new teammate like this, because it would be human nature to say, this guy's going to take my touches, this guy's going to steal my glory, this guy's going to be toting the football. I want to be the one toting the football. It'd be human nature to want to feel that way, and yet time after time, we see a lot of college football players, but it's specifically to a place like Georgia where that's just not really the mindset, that if this player makes the team better, I'm all about the team, and therefore that's a good thing, even if it comes at the expense of some of my own potential personal glory here. I just think that kind of thing should be celebrated. And I read the clip or read the quote from what Roderick Robinson told the Players Lounge about that the other day. And when those kinds of things happen, I think we are going to highlight that around here, because a team-first mentality like that has certainly seemed to serve Georgia well over the last couple of seasons.
Oh, most definitely. I think the culture that Kirby has really brought to this team that is really team me, little me, big. So I also think that the running backs have seen that you can still get drafted not being the main guy. James Cook has never been the main ball carrier, and he went in the second round and was a 1,000-yard rusher this season. So I think with the evidence at hand that we have seen at the University of Georgia, that you don't have to be the main guy to still get drafted. I mean, just look at Cook, Chubb, and Sony. Look at the Philadelphia Swift. Just look at those guys that have shared the load, and it's made the team better, and it's still got those guys drafted without having the gaudy numbers and being – I just don't think at Georgia anymore you're going to see that one guy carrying the ball 30 times.
All right, so let me put you on the spot here for a minute. Do you think that running backs embrace this mentality more so than wide receivers do? And I don't mean like Georgia's wide receivers. I mean every wide receiver. That the thing that people say, it's a cliche, but like the idea of the sort of diva wide receiver, like are wide receivers more prone to want the individual glory than running backs are? Because running backs across all levels of the sport, NFL, college, high school, they seem to be a little bit more comfortable sharing carries, where sometimes, we talked earlier this week about, how Georgia kind of brands itself to other wide receivers. Do receivers just for whatever reason kind of naturally sort of seek out a little bit more individual glory in a way that running backs don't, based on the Roderick Robinson quote there?
I think so, and I think it goes back to the evolution of the running back position. I think everyone has seen, just take for example, DeMarco Murray when he played with the Dallas Cowboys, and he had over 300 carries, and he was the best running back in the league. Then the next year, he just fell off the face of the earth because he had so many carries. Like Larry Johnson from the Kansas City Chiefs was getting 400 carries plus year, and his life expectancy as a running back goes down. So I think the running back now sees that they trying to play longer, and once you hit that age of 30, they think that your football career is over. So with less carries, I think now they feel that they can continue to play longer than 30. As wide receivers, we want the ball on the outside. We feel that numbers get us drafted, especially from the college perspective. We don't go out and be this 1,000-yard receiver. We don't get the glory. We don't get the accolades, and NFL scouts don't see us, and that's far from the truth. I mean, just take example of Ladd. Ladd's probably never had over 700 yards in his career, but his talent is going to get him drafted.
I want to ask you a question. Maybe you don't have all the insight on this. I certainly don't know. I'm sort of curious. So yesterday, Georgia announced a couple staff moves. Darryl Dickey, who had been an offensive analyst, he's no longer here. Scott Cochran, who had been kind of the special teams, coordinator, for lack of a better phrase, but it had been in kind of an off-field coaching role since he stepped away from the program. He's no longer with the program either. And I'm curious about the Cochran stuff as it relates to special teams from the standpoint that Kirby's talking about special teams all the time, and yet the special teams coordinator, so to speak, was not an on-field coach. And a lot of programs kind of divide their special teams responsibilities different ways among their on-field coaches. But, Terrence, can you shed some insight into exactly how it is that Georgia instructs special teams? If a guy like Cochran was not an on-field coach, and Cochran's replacement also going to be kind of in that analyst role here, Georgia greatly values special teams, demands excellence from that, and yet the special teams coach has not been an on-field guy. How does the process of teaching special teams work at a place like UGA where those special teams responsibilities, I guess, are kind of divided up? Can you give us any insight on that?
Yes. I'm not there every day, but the little time I have been, I think it's, there are certain coaches that take on an ownership of certain special teams. So you have your on-the-field coaches have a segment to own. So I personally, you just told me, so I didn't know that Cochran wasn't a on-the-field coach, even though having the special teams title. So that's new to me. But there's coaches that take ownership of certain special teams. Like the offensive line coach may be the extra point field goals. That's probably his portion of special teams with the defensive line. So I think each coach has to take ownership of a special team so everybody won't get bogged down to a certain segment of special teams.
One more before we let you go here. There's been a lot of talk lately about Travis Smith, 4-star wide receiver out of Westlake. I know you like to watch a lot of these guys. Have you seen much of Travis Smith? It seems like that Georgia could be kind of in the mix for him a little bit. You're laughing there, so you may know more about this. But what can you tell us about Travis Smith then?
Come on, B.A. Come on. Travis has been part of the family since the 8th grade.
I should have known.
So that's why I'm laughing. He's been with me since the 8th, 9th grade, and I've seen his growth as a receiver. And I tell you this, with him and C.J. Wiley, those two I know definitely are high on Georgia's board, along with a receiver from Calvary Day. I can't remember his name, but those three are very high on Georgia's board, and rightfully so. So I've coached C.J. Wiley as a 8th grader all the way up now. I coached it personally this past season. I've trained Travis since he was in the 8th grade. So I've seen his development, and he is a guy that really can stretch the field, really strong hands, and he made contested catches look easy. So I can't wait to see where he goes. For as his college choice, I stay out of that part of it. But as a receiver, he is probably one of the better receivers to come out of the state of Georgia, probably since Hazelwood.
Nice. Love to hear that. And of course, Westlake's no stranger to having great players, but between him and obviously Juan Gaston along the offensive line, they're going to be college scouts all over Westlake's sideline as much as they possibly can be for this upcoming fall.
Oh, most definitely. They are loaded over there. Westlake traditionally has always had talent. So it's funny that I live 5 minutes from Westlake, so I'm slated to go to Westlake.
Okay.
So I know the talent that is in that area.
Well, listen, speaking of talent, and when it comes to working like great players like Travis Smith and others. You've been doing that for a long time, obviously. And for people who want to be kind of the next Travis Smith or the next guy that gets on the radar for college scouts, things like that, because of how well they catch the football, how can they connect with you, Terrence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy, get some of that nice swag, that good-looking gear, and also get some top-notch training as well?
So the bubble work been in full effect for 2 weeks now. We had 2 great weeks of training. Myself, Ron Veal, and TJ Heat. So if you're looking for your son to become a better player at DB as well, I have a DB trainer in there, a quarterback trainer. There's not a lot of trainer groups in Atlanta that has quarterbacks, receivers, and DBs in the same spot. So we're getting the full bowl of wax of training in my training group. So you could reach me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, great stuff. Always appreciate your insight. Really, really sharp football mind here. And it's great to talk to you. We'll look forward to doing that again very soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, we talked about Scott Cochran there a moment ago. In the case of Cochran, obviously people know the personal issues that he was dealing with that caused him to step away from football. He's been very open about that. I think when guys tell stories like that, I think it has incredible value, because for people who may be dealing with their own version of that journey, it can be a really lonely feeling, and you sort of feel like, well, you're the only one that's – I mean, your mind does weird things to you where you sort of end up thinking, well, I'm the only one that's ever felt this way, the only one that's ever, had to deal with this before. And when other people tell that story, their own experience with that, I think it kind of – I mean, this is what the recovery world is sort of built on, the idea of these shared stories build connection, and those connections allow you to – make changes that you need to make. So I'm always grateful when guys like Cochran tell their story. But the point is that's well documented what he went through, and that caused him to step away from football. And yet when he did step away, no longer an on-field coach, but he's still making, I think, the same amount of money, $500-something thousand, whatever else, and completely separate from the personal stories that we all have come to know about, Coach Cochran. That's a little bit of a situation that just can't go on forever one way or another, right? It's like, at a certain point, there's a little bit of maybe a different opportunity when it comes to the analyst position at Georgia, or perhaps a guy who's now kind of ready for the next thing, professionally. This is one of those things. I just don't know that you go on in perpetuity as an analyst in that situation, making almost $500,000. It's just a little bit of a different type of deal there. So that could have been a situation, obviously, where, perhaps both sides were just sort of ready to kind of move on, because that didn't really feel like a permanent situation necessarily, at least in my eyes when it comes to that. But we obviously wish him well, and Daryl Dickey well too, as he also moves on too. We know how valuable Georgia kind of views these positions, taking advantage of that support staff and really allowing the support staff to provide support to the program the way that it's supposed to. So obviously there'll, I'm sure, be more announcements forthcoming about exactly how Georgia uses those positions that are available to it. Let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here. And let's talk about the fun on the way. And for me, still thinking back on Icon of the Seas, the great trip I had a chance to take a couple of weeks ago. And obviously it gets me excited about being on board with all of you for Allure of the Seas coming up in April. Going to Nassau in the Bahamas, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay. And if you're watching on video, and I realize radio podcast, you can't see this, but that's Crown's Edge right there. Y'all, I did this. And it really is one of my favorite things about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I have been lucky to take, several of those. So obviously, when you do something more than once, you kind of get into a rhythm and a routine. Sometimes doing some of the same stuff over and over because it's comfortable. You like it. But the other thing about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, it's a chance to sort of branch out and do something you wouldn't otherwise do. And for me, that's what Crown's Edge was. When I was on Icon of the Seas a couple of weeks ago, I was kind of convinced to do it. I probably needed a little bit of convincing, but boy, when it was over with, I was so glad that I did. And you see Deserted, the milkshake bar there, another thing that I probably don't need as much convincing to step up and get a great milkshake. But sometimes, challenging myself with a really fun, experience, almost like an attraction, like you'd see in a music park in a place like Icon of the Seas. But I was really glad that I did that. And that's just some of the fun, unexpected, seeing a different version of yourself. When you're on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, that's what you get. So we want you to do this along with us in April. Jessica Slater is a travel agent specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to help you do all of that. You can give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you all about all the fun stuff going down when it comes to Allure of the Seas with us, Utopia of the Seas, another brand new ship debuting in July. There is just some really fun stuff going on when it comes to Royal Caribbean here right now. I'll also remind you, we're only a couple of minutes away from the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm on our program. You'll like that with Jake here today. Good stories to tell about McCole Hardman and Malik Herring and Charlie Warner, all of those former teammates of his in the Super Bowl on Sunday. That's good with Jake here coming up in a moment. We have breaking news, though, to kick things off here as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Georgia State, one of the programs that started its spring practice the earliest of just about anybody. They've already had a couple of those here this year, but what they no longer have is a head coach. Sean Elliott, the Georgia State coach, is reportedly leaving Atlanta to go back to a place he's worked before, South Carolina, where it looks like Elliott's going to become tight ends coach there for the Gamecocks. So we have another example of a sitting head coach leaving that job to go be an assistant. We saw Jeff Hafley leave Boston College to go be an NFL assistant. We saw Chip Kelly leave UCLA to go be an Ohio State assistant. And now we have Sean Elliott leaving Georgia State to go be a South Carolina assistant. This is pretty clearly a trend right now. It's a trend that I don't think should necessarily be ignored. College football in some respects is going to get smaller here. The group of five is just sort of whittling away right before our eyes. I'm probably overstating it somewhat by saying it that way. But watch the upcoming NFL draft, same as a year ago. You're not seeing, guys below the sort of high Power 5 level be drafted at maybe the same rate you've seen in the past, because now with the advent of the transfer portal, the talent that exists at the lower level of the sport is sort of working its way to the Power 5 programs, which maybe they deserve to do that. Maybe that's what they should be doing. But one way or another, when head coaches are leaving to go be assistants, when players are transferring to go play at bigger programs, the group of five is just getting smaller. That's one of those things you can't quite know. You can't quite help but notice. And as far as how this relates to Georgia, obviously South Carolina is an SEC foe, and so Elliott's going to come there and try to help Shane Beamer sort of correct some, I guess, sliding that took place in the program a little bit this past season. But beyond that, there's this. I've kind of sort of posited this theory before, and I'm going to say it again, that Georgia's got a lot of assistants who've been in place now for a little while, and you sort of wonder, well, how long can Georgia hold on to Dell McGee? How long can Georgia hold on to Todd Hartley? And how long can Georgia hold on to Trey Scott? Some of those guys like that. How long can Georgia keep these assistants in place? Brian McClendon to a certain extent too, although he's a little shorter in this current tenure at Georgia than those other guys that I just mentioned. How long can Georgia hold on to these type of guys? There was a time not all that, into the past where you would assume that Georgia couldn't hold on to these guys very long at all, that assistant coaches were upwardly mobile. They were looking to get the next thing. And for many of guys like this, the next thing might be a head coaching position. It was only a couple of years ago that, for instance, Charles Huff, the running backs coach at Alabama, left to go be Marshall head coach. And that seemed like, that's a really cool promotion that a running backs coach could become a head coach. But in 2024, I don't know that a similar coach would make a similar move. If Dell McGee was offered a group of five head coaching position right now, would he take it? Just given the fact that a guy like Sean Elliott is actually going the opposite direction, leaving the group of five to go back and be an assistant, that because of the absence of talent and because of the huge imbalance financially, that I don't know if you're a valuable assistant coach, the likes of which that Georgia exclusively employs, I don't know that those programs, or I should say those coaches, see those programs as destinations anymore. And I don't know that being a group of five head coach is better than being a position coach at a place like UGA. So what does this trend mean for Georgia in particular? They may actually be able to hold on to these high-value assistants a lot longer than anybody else ever thought they would, because there's not necessarily anywhere for them to go unless it's like Dan Lanning, where you go and become Oregon head coach. And so let's watch. Let's watch what the future of Todd Hartley is. What does he want his next move to be? I'm guessing it's probably not to go be the Louisiana Lafayette coach, or to go be the whatever coach, because when you see Sean Elliott leaving Georgia State to go to South Carolina, I think you're seeing the evidence of a diminished value of those kinds of coaching positions. And I could say Hartley, but I could say a lot of the other Georgia coaches in that same situation. Speaking of coaching hires, looks like Kentucky has now made it official with their rumored replacement for Liam Cohen. His name is Bush Hamdan. He's the former offensive coordinator at Boise State. And I will be more than happy to tell you I have no idea if this is a good hire or not. But it is fairly safe to assume that he's not the same level of offensive coordinator that Liam Cohen was. And Kentucky without Liam Cohen, we have examples of this. Remember, Cohen sort of played the game of came to Kentucky in 2021, left in 2022, came back in 2023. So we've got a little bit of an A-B test here between what Kentucky looks like when it doesn't have Cohen and what it looks like when it does have Cohen. And this is a very different version of the offense. And Mark Stoops looks like a lot more of an exciting head coach when he's got an OC like Liam Cohen pushing the buttons for his offense. So Hamden may have invented the sport for all I know, but this seems like a likely downgraded OC. Cohen leaves to go become the Bucs OC. That clearly gives you an idea of his estimated worth. So what does this mean for Brock Vandagriff in particular? I don't know. I would say this makes the Georgia game against Kentucky relatively early in this upcoming season probably a little bit easier. Mark Stoops is just nothing special. No matter what people want to say, Stoops is just nothing special as a head coach. Texas A&M fans revolted when they thought he was going to be their guy, and I sort of understand where that's coming from. But Stoops, who does know how to coach toughness and does know how to value lines of scrimmage, when you give him a sharp offensive mind, that can be sort of a formidable force. That's what Liam Cohen offered. Cohen's no longer there. They bring in a guy from Boise State. Safest bet here is this is likely a downgrade. This is not a college football story, but it does impact college football fans. Vern Lundquist, the former voice of the SEC on CBS, who still does the Masters broadcast, and I believe they're from the 16th hour. That's the only the broadcast he still does. He has announced that this year's Masters will be his last. And so, boy, what a voice. What a guy that we connect so deeply. And how about our team here getting the Vern Lundquist visuals going here? We're talking about this is like a real show. That's amazing. So good stuff there, from our folks putting all that together. And honestly, I love Vern Lundquist. I really do. I love his work on the Masters. It is so good. He is such a big part of that broadcast. I'm really sad to think that this will be his last year there doing that, because it's just a comforting thing to hear on that spring weekend. And I enjoyed him when he was doing the broadcast on CBS there as well. So we wish him well as he moves into a full-fledged retirement here, but a voice that will certainly be missed across sports, because Lundquist was a very, very fun guy to have. One more thing to get to here. We talked about this yesterday on our R.S. Andrews cool down at the end of the show. Crystal Conte, the Texas athletic director, was asked the other day about the future of Texas playing Texas A&M. And Del Conte says that Texas and Texas A&M are going to play every single year, which, if that's true, given the fact that Texas is also slated to play Oklahoma every year, sounds like Del Conte thinks that the SEC is going to move to a 9-game conference schedule. And Del Conte recently said basically as much, that obviously for the 2024 season, there's an 8-game schedule in place. And then he thinks maybe for the next season, there could still be an 8-game schedule in place, but eventually moving towards a 9-game conference slate by, I think, 2026 he talked about there. This, to me, was a very interesting statement, because I have sort of assumed here for a while that the SEC just didn't have the votes to get to 9. Del Conte seems to think that's the case, or he's just really adamant that the 9-game conference slate is what the league should be doing, and he's sort of pushing to get them there. So perhaps the notion that the SEC could get to a 9-game conference slate and more of the traditional rivalries could be preserved, because if Georgia only plays an 8-game conference slate, it's not playing Auburn every year, for instance. The words here of the Texas AD give new life to the notion that there could be an expanded SEC schedule coming there at some point in time. So we shall see about that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as promised, we'll move in now to a Kroger Fresh Take and bringing on the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, to today's show. Kroger Fresh Take, welcoming the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, kind enough to join us not just on the show, but on video there as well. You'll see he's got his Washington Commanders shirt on. He's looking good. Jake, it's great to see your face as a part of the program. We appreciate you doing that.
Brandon, what's going on? Always a great pleasure to be here on the show with you. Even better to be here on video, man. Trying to be a little bit more personable today. Hopefully we can keep this up and mix it in the routine.
Well, you're watching the Super Bowl, I'm sure, on Sunday, and like any NFL player, you hope to one day bring home the Lombardi Trophy of your own. But what was your feeling, seeing Cole Harbin, first of all, catch the game-winning touchdown? That's the guy you threw touchdown passes to Georgia. You threw touchdown passes to him while at Georgia. Now he's catching a touchdown of this magnitude. What is your feeling when you see a guy that you know so well be a hero on a stage like that?
Yeah, it's just a great story for Mikal to, he's coming full circle back to the Chiefs. He went and signed a free agent deal with the Jets, didn't quite turn out the way maybe he expected it to, and gets traded back to the Chiefs and has, of course, in Mikal fashion, just another big game in the biggest game of the year. So that's just Mikal. That's what he does, and just a great story and a great play from him. And it was also fun to watch Malik Herring get some snaps out there and watch my roommate and one of my best friends and Charlie Warner out there playing as well. So had dogs all over the field, and you got to stay tuned in and locked in, and ended up being a really, really good football game.
Yeah, I love that. I know you and Charlie are good friends, and we also talked on Monday. You and I have talked about this before, the Christmas commitments video that you were part of here with us at DawgNation when Malik Herring announced his commitment. And, that's a guy that, he fought for a spot on the Georgia roster. He fought for a spot on the NFL roster. Now he's getting Super Bowl rings. Charlie's a guy that's really playing a lot for San Francisco and kind of a big part of what Kyle Shanahan wants to do there. And, Jake, the point that I made is that's a lot of what football is, right? I mean, there's the glitz and glamour of dating Taylor Swift, but there's also I think the larger story that's more true for more players, which is it's a sport in which you just grind. And sometimes there's not a ton of fanfare about it. There's not a lot of glitz and glamour. It's just showing up and doing your job. And whether it's Robert Beal, Charlie Warner for San Francisco, or a guy like Malik for Kansas City, it does say something pretty cool about these ex-Georgia guys, that they are in the league and thriving and making a living and, really doing what is obviously not an easy thing, which is making a life for themselves in the NFL. Super Bowl kind of a reminder of that.
Yeah, it's tough out there. It is not easy. There are some great perks that come along with being an NFL football player and getting the opportunity to play a kid's game for a living. But it's tough. It's very competitive out there. There are people all over the country and all over the world, really, that want your job. So to be your best every single day, it's very tough to do. And man, just shout out to those guys who got to do it at the highest level and at the highest and biggest game at the highest level.
As a quarterback, I can't move off this topic without asking you about Patrick Mahomes. And, I said kind of going into the game, Jake, that I wasn't ready to put him into the Tom Brady category just yet. I actually thought that San Francisco would win the game just simply because, hey, asking him to win again back-to-back at one point in time this year, the Chiefs did not look like a Super Bowl team, and yet Mahomes just finds that ability to rise to the moment on the biggest stage. What it takes to play the quarterback, position at this level. What can you say about the career that Patrick Mahomes is putting together right now?
Yeah, I mean, his career so far has been nothing short of great. He's done a fantastic job of making plays with his legs, with his arms, and making plays in the most clutch moments of football games. He just finds a way to get it done. It doesn't matter who it's with. He's just going to find a way to make a play and to win a football game. So he's creeping up that list, and he's doing a great job. Obviously, the longevity of career is going to be a very big factor on that. But man, right now, kind of all signs point to him ending up being one of the greatest to ever play the position.
This week, Georgia brought in another transfer player, Ben Urasek. That's a tight end from Stanford. This is a guy that couple-time Pac-12 all-league player, injured a little bit in 2023, but a good number of catches in 2021 and 2022. Jake, as a quarterback, you always want weapons, guys you can throw to, but in particular, what is the value of a tight end? Now, people are going to want to make the comparison to Brock Bowers because Bowers is also from California, and that's probably unfair to anybody, but knowing that Bowers is no longer in the program and knowing that Georgia wants to have as many capable tight ends as it can have to go along with Oscar Delp, the guys that are already here. What is the value of having a tight end that you can really trust to throw to the football to? Georgia clearly likes having good ones. One of the reasons why seemingly it's wanting to bring in Urasek here. Yeah,
and you can ask Patrick Mahomes the same question too, and Brock Purdy as well. I mean, just having a good tight end, it's like a second quarterback on the field. Generally, those guys really understand the game of football because they have to understand run scheme, and they have to understand the passing concept scheme. So these guys are really smart. They understand football, and in today's day and age, they're very athletic, and they can end up being a quarterback's best friend for a ton of reasons. And man, when you have a guy who ends up being one of the best athletes on the field, they can make a ton of plays just with the ball in their hands.
So a story you've been following this week kind of outside of Georgia involves Alabama, and there's some controversy because Ryan Grubb was named Alabama offensive coordinator, then left to go to the Seattle Seahawks. And the controversy here stems from the idea that it certainly seems like the Seattle Times reported this as being true, that Alabama waited until after that right to the end of that 30-day window for transfers after Nick Saban's retirement to kind of make the announcement, well, Grubb's actually not going to be here. He's going to be going back to the NFL or back to Seattle to be in the NFL instead. I guess a couple-part question on this. Let me start with this. As a player yourself, do you understand the frustration that some players might have about, I think I'm going to be playing with this one coach, and then you sort of wait to the end to let me know, well, no, that guy is actually not going to be here. When you're quarterback or any position, your coordinator matters, right? And having things come to find out be different than you were sort of told they would be, I'm guessing you could probably understand how some players would perhaps be maybe not all that happy about that.
Yeah, this 100% as a player, I would be very, very frustrated with the idea of thinking that I'm playing for one coach when in fact it's somebody I have no idea and I have no control over. So, I mean, this is kind of why I lean on and maybe fight for or agree with the transfer portal, because if college coaches can go and change jobs on a whim, I'm like, you guys are recruiting me. I'm committing to you and the program. And man, if you're changing jobs for millions of dollars, I should be able to have a little bit of leeway in which college that I'm going to, because the coach matters so much. Let
me squeeze in one more point on this. Kalen DeBoer's got offensive expertise, so it's kind of his system anyway. But, Grubb was supposed to be the guy. You've also got change over in Ohio State now where Bill O'Brien was brought in. Now he's going to Boston College, and then Chip Kelly's coming in to run that offense. How important is this time of year for the installation part of all this? And if you're a quarterback trying to learn the offense or trying to get familiar with a new system, how much does this time really matter for all of that? And if you're a program like Alabama that, at least at the time of us recording this, doesn't have an offensive coordinator officially in place, how much is lost by not having that be true at the moment?
Yeah, this may be kind of obvious, but I think it matters a lot less for the players at this time of the year, and it matters a whole lot more for the coaches.
Okay.
For the coaches, they're trying to get together, and they're really trying to put together a system, put together a playbook. Hey, what are our schemes? What do we like? What's our skill set at certain positions? So to me, and in this time of the year, man, this is just all about the coaches and implementing an offense. They're behind closed doors and they're saying, hey, this is what we like. This is what we're going to call this, and really putting together a playbook. So this time of the year is all about the coaches. And I would say here in probably 2 more weeks is really where it's going to start mattering to the players when they start implementing their offenses, getting ready for spring practice.
That makes a lot of sense, Jake. We appreciate your time on the Kroger Fresh Take today, and always love your insight on the game. And we hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Brandon, as always, man, thank you for having me, and it's always a blessing to be here.
Absolutely. Jake, absolutely love Jake Fromm on the Kroger Fresh Take. Always good to get his perspective and all that. We appreciate our friends at Kroger making it all possible. How about Kroger Chef Jr. coming up this month? The chance to make some melon ball parfait. How interesting and fun does that sound? And what a great way to get your kids eating something that's good for them and sort of fun to be a part of the food preparation process for. It's just $7 per child. The website is KrogerChefJr.com. The word junior spelled out, Junior, KrogerChefJr.com. A couple of different times this month, March 2nd, March 16th. And in addition to making the melon ball parfait, you also get the apron and patch, the chef's hat, the recipe card and holder, and the melon baller. That sounds awesome. So check out KrogerChefJr.com for more on that today. KrogerChefJr.com today. Speaking of sounding awesome, how about a golden shoe today? Requiring some explanation. So apparently there is a former Florida running back, allegedly, who has been selling some fake autograph merchandise, things like that. And so One of the things that he allegedly sold that was not an accurate signing, and the man involved, Marco Wilson, said as much on social media, is this autographed picture of Marco Wilson throwing the shoe. And it's autographed by Marco Wilson with the caption, "Fly high." So apparently this is a fake autograph that's out there, but some Florida fans saw it, thought it was real, and were mad because why would you be glorifying such a bad moment in Florida history? And so a guy named Penny Outlaw wrote in on this discussion and tagging me saying, "It's the golden shoe for the greatest moment in Gator history." Penny, I'm really appreciative of you sharing this for me. This entire story is funny. The fake autograph allegedly being peddled by a former Florida player, the fact that it's captioned with "Fly High." There is literally nothing about this that I do not like. So, Penny, we certainly appreciate that. A well-earned golden shoe coming your direction for all of this. By the way, speaking of lousy, stinking Gators, I think tomorrow we may get more into the NIL issues the Gators are dealing with here right now. I think we've been kind of waiting for the appropriate moment to really kind of pounce on that. But we'll pounce on this now 1,195 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. We call it our Gator Hitter Updater. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is what they are all about. It's the middle of February, and we're doing a show that's roughly an hour and 10 minutes long. So we are mid-season form right here and ready to go. All right, I'm going to go to Facebook first and get those folks involved in the conversation. I'm going to kind of bounce through to the others. I think a lot of you know next week there will not be a live cool down except until Friday. So we're pre-recorded Monday. We've got some fun stuff Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and sort of a back to a normal show on Friday. I'm taking a little bit of time to be with my family. I believe I mentioned that last week. Or I should say, I believe I mentioned that earlier this week. So we will tell you more all about that here coming up. Joseph Kennedy wondering how many days it's been since Florida won a national title. Someone gave us this the other day. I believe we've surpassed 5,500 days on that front. I believe it's been more than that, right? Yeah, way more than that. It's a huge number. It's a ponderous number. Gary Holt sharing blessings and tidings of goodwill to everybody. Appreciate that. Let's see what else. Eric Ray says that Kirby needs to offer Jake Fromm an offensive analyst job as soon as he's done with the NFL. Yeah, I think that Jake would be great at that. I could see Jake being a very good coach. I do. Sharp guy. I could see that for sure. Let's see what else. Scrolling past things I can't read. Scrolling past things I don't understand. Eventually I'll get to some good comments. So, yeah. Honestly, I can't tell what they're talking about on Facebook here right now. Drew Thrasher, though, talking about some basic football, saying, since we run a 2 tight end set, do we try to run more 2 running back set? Yeah, Georgia has admittedly not done a ton of that. Jimbo Fisher used to do a good bit of that, and obviously that offense didn't work very well. And you still see the fullback used a lot in the NFL, by the way. You just don't see as much 2 running back stuff at a place like Georgia, even with some of the slot style running backs, like what James Cook would have been and things like that, still just didn't do nearly as much of that. But I do believe, the presence of Ben Yurcek shows that Georgia still plans to be two tight end a pretty good bit, which could create some opportunities for the running game. And as I said before, said this off the top of the show, I'd love to see a little bit more balance. Georgia has a lot more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. I'd love to see them improve that passing touchdown total. But it's the inverse flip of that, where Georgia has a lot more explosive, if you define explosive by 20 or more yards, passing plays than it does rushing plays. So I'd like to see Georgia improve its passing touchdowns and improve its rushing plays of 20 or more yards. If you can find a little bit more balance in those 2 categories, I think that could make the Georgia offense pretty tough to stop. Randy Hall says South Carolina just got crushed by Auburn in basketball. Is that a new trend? Well, I do know that Auburn's really good, and perhaps this is a situation where a South Carolina team, which was not expected to be very good and has clearly outplayed its projection for most of the season, maybe the clock is striking midnight on South Carolina here. Doug Rayburn and reminding us that the Diamond Dogs do open tomorrow. Really excited about what Wes Johnson's team brings to the table. Really, really excited about that. So, Doug, yeah, you better believe we are all over the Diamond Dogs. Hoping to get out there a little bit more this year, too. Matthew Dill says, my stepson won his church league basketball championship last night. Between the Dogs' last few seasons and Little League sports, he fully expects every season should end with a championship, or as he calls it, a ship. Matthew, I like that. That's really good stuff. Congratulations, indeed. That's a lot of fun. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. Dogs Only says you got to love the tush push for a touchdown. Talking about the rushing touchdowns. Yeah, Georgia had 40 of those rushing touchdowns a year ago. Let's see what else. Senior Dog says, I believe Kirby Smart should be required to give press conferences at least every 2 weeks. Hold on. Let me read this. At least every 2 weeks during the offseason. I know he hates them. But without fans, there's no college football. We'd love to know about injury updates, things like that. Yeah. I don't know that hate is a strong enough word for how Kirby Smart would view a press conference every 2 weeks, but I certainly wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't mind that either. That'd be a nice thing. Randy Hall wonders if we'll ever give away fake golden shoes. I don't know about that. Maybe one of these days. For a while, we had golden shoe T-shirts. I don't know whatever happened to those. Dogs on Top mentioning a sad story the other day of a football player at Furman, who I believe went to Harrison, who had passed away. Says it was a family friend, an only child and an outstanding young man. His services this weekend. Please ask DawgNation to keep Terry and Fred, his parents, in our thoughts and prayers. Yeah, I mean, just an unimaginably tragic story. I know we've had a couple of those here lately. I know there was a football player from Cedar Grove that recently passed away as well. Our buddy Rusty was talking about that. Just unimaginable tragedy. Really, really unimaginable. So absolutely, sincerely in our prayers for that. I appreciate you sharing that in the comment section. I really do. On a much lighter note, Johnny Prescott says, if you guys ever do an award to honor the greatest of Golden Shoe recipients, today's autographed shoe throwing Golden Shoe is going to be tough to beat. Johnny, that's actually a pretty good point. It's like, since the autograph is fake already, there's no fraud if we just photocopied it and just gave everybody one of those. I really do like that. Marco Wilson, it pains me to admit, it's actually pretty funny because – so the way this story goes is one of the Florida, media types, I think it's the one that cried when Florida lost, which we never made a big deal about because we try not to take stuff like that too far, but nonetheless. So he's like, hey, be careful buying autograph gear from player blah, blah, blah. And then somebody came in and said, I don't know what you're talking about. I love the autograph piece that I got. And so I think this may have been tongue-in-cheek to begin with about the Marco Wilson thing. But Marco Wilson then responded to this as like, yeah, you definitely got finessed on this, meaning that there was not a real autograph. So the whole thing was kind of funny. And Marco Wilson is pretty funny in a way that Florida fans don't always love, which in a weird way makes me like Marco Wilson even more. So, yeah, I am a fan of all of that. All right, let me go to YouTube for a moment and see what they're doing over there. On you, but by the way, how about the allegations that a former Florida player is selling, not the best autograph stuff either? That's kind of tough. It's kind of tough. But those are only allegations. I don't even know the first thing about any of that. So those allegations don't come from me. All right, on YouTube. Oh, Jonathan Aaron says, don't bring any bad luck to the baseball team like you did to basketball. Fair. Tough, but fair. Tough, but fair. Baggins and friends encouraging people to hit the like button. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. As I said yesterday, I'm not always great about promoting that kind of stuff, but I certainly appreciate that. DMart42 says, UGA used to have some legendary fullbacks. Ron Haynes, Sean Chappis, Brandon Sutherland. I love fullbacks, too. Watch these NFL teams that use the fullback really well. Still a very valuable part of the offense at that level. Michael Wilson says you'd run Kirby off if you had to give a press conference every 2 weeks. Yeah. I think Kirby would probably I think he'd probably hate that about as much as he'd possibly hate anything. I think that's about right. Lance D says, I always cringe when I see single back sets inside the red zone when the lone back 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage. I know what you mean, Lance. Johnny Surf Dog says, even though our schedule is brutal, I'm still for a 9th SEC game. I dislike that late November small school opponent in our schedule right before Georgia Tech. I think it's UMass or something like that. Yeah, obviously we don't like those games either. I do think there's a fair discussion we had of, okay, if you assume that the cupcake games are going away, as we said before, the whole group of 5 maybe eventually go away. But if you assume the cupcake games are going away, what would you rather do? Would you rather play Florida State, Ohio State, USC, something along those lines, or would you rather play more games against Texas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, teams like that? It's a fair discussion to be had. I do think that if the SEC expands the league, makes it bigger, brings in Texas and Oklahoma, but it does that at the expense of, well, you're not really playing your traditional rivalry games anymore, and you're also not playing these other games as frequently as you could, well, I would say that you've lost something on that. I would say you've lost something on that. So I am, generally speaking, in favor of the 9-game conference schedule. Stick D's wondering how many days in a row I've worn a new outfit. We're working on several. See, the problem is I don't have a system in place, so eventually I'm going to get confused. But it's been several days in a row, and it will continue. Now, next week there's going to be some repeats because it's pre-record a little bit, but I've been consistently wearing something different. Jonathan Aaron says, I know you got your wife something nice for Valentine's Day with all that Jimbo money. Sadly, admittedly, Valentine's was not well respected in our house yesterday. We've never done a ton for Valentine's. I'm not great at Valentine's. My wife said that she had a card that she forgot to give me last year that she was going to give me yesterday, but eventually she just never did. So apparently I've got a Valentine's card coming my way that is going to be about 2 years old by the time I eventually get it. So I apologized yesterday and said, listen, I'm sorry, I haven't really done much in the way of Valentine's. She said, that's okay. I have you a card, but it's a card that I meant to give you last year and just forgot to. And so yesterday she forgot it again. We got our kids something, but Valentine's is not a big deal around our house. But I do obviously love my wife though, but Valentine's not really the best way to show that. Now, not saying you shouldn't, just saying. Let's see what else. Oh, yeah. Paul Moon mentioned Quavon Hicks' face mask. That thing just was like a grill. That was, I do love that face mask. And I'm guessing a face mask that has that many bars on it would have the potential to do some damage, right? I mean, if you take a shot from that face mask, you got to feel it more, right? Curtis Williams says, I wish that Kirby Smart would have embraced the streak and the three-peat the way the Chiefs have already stated as a goal and motivation going into next season. I sort of agree with you. And I get why Kirby did what he did. I think he was trying to really sort of fight. I mean, he said it over and over again during the summer that he thought the biggest threat to Georgia was a sense of complacency. And by talking up a three-peat, you are, in his mind, I think anyway, treating a championship as if it's somehow deserved, that you kind of like an inheritance or a birthright or something like that. But I do, in a sort of a roundabout way, sort of think that Georgia took it too far in terms of ignoring the level of history, because that can be its own form of motivation. And I'm not saying that's why Georgia didn't win the national championship. I'm just saying that I do think there was a way to discuss the history at stake for the program other than the way that Georgia chose to do it, and the Chiefs may be a little bit of an example of that. So I sort of think you're right. I sort of think you're right. Stick D says that the streak of wearing different outfits cannot continue unless I bring a different one for every day of the week next week. So I do think from like a continuity standpoint, I probably should do that. For instance, like we do the Jake Fromm thing. I don't change clothes for that. I just wear the thing that I was wearing. And so we interview Jake, because Jake's usually pre-recorded. I I'm wearing a different shirt. It's a break in continuity. I probably shouldn't do that kind of thing. So, yeah, maybe one of these days I'll bring a bunch of changes of clothes. But the people are already waiting on me all the time anyway to kind of do something. The idea they need to wait on me to now change clothes before I do every little thing. I'm guessing I may have a little bit of a staff revolt in that case if I start changing clothes before everything. Jay Shipe's a very funny line. You see me jump? Like we have a little talkback system here, and it's probably a little louder than I prefer it to be. So I just jumped like I was being attacked. So there you go. But Kaylee says she would encourage the changes of clothes. I don't know if I could do that. That's a lot to keep up with. Christopher W. says, when you mentioned Robinson being unselfish, because most running backs expected to be their turn, my thoughts went to Shooter McGavin when he said it's Shooter's turn. Yeah, there you go. I'm always in favor of any Shooter McGavin reference. Jonathan Aaron on the subject of, thinking about championships, things like that. What is it Kirby always says? Humility is only one day away. Yeah, that's the case. Morgan Forrest says I'm a little red-faced. One of my weaknesses is I have a little bit of that thing in the NBA that time when, Kobe Bryant was, guarding whoever, and was it Barnes? And, he fake pass, right in front of Kobe's face, and Kobe didn't flinch at all. It's, one of these great examples of just how tough, Kobe Bryant was. I am not like that. Now, for whatever reason, I just have a bad flinch reflex. I just flinch really easy. And so when that came over the speaker a minute ago, which I don't believe you could hear, my flinch reflex showed up. I am not Kobe Bryant, in other words. Allison Whitaker says, my wife sounds like good people. She is. If you're talking about my wife, she is. She is. And one of these days, I'm going to get the Valentine's card that she bought me years ago. So we'll see if that goes. Bill Shirley says, I got my wife a card and a Reese's heart. Now, listen, for some reason, I love Reese's cups that are not shaped like Reese's cups. Have you ever noticed this before? That, any normal Reese's is good, but when it's a Reese's that's shaped like an egg or a tree or a heart, for some reason, a Reese's that's shaped like a different thing than the little circle with the ridges, it tastes so good. So I would have absolutely accepted a Reese's heart yesterday. I would have accepted that. Hallmark holiday, commercial contrivance or not, a Reese's cup shaped like a heart, I would have definitely accepted that yesterday, because the Reese's that are shaped like things other than the circle, they taste amazing. Amazing. Jake Shipe says he likes the minis. Listen, I'm not turning down any Reese's cup, but for some reason the mini just doesn't quite hit the same way for me. Like that little dopamine rush, I don't quite get the same gushing of the dopamine off the mini the way that I do when you bite into one of those just sort of oblong-shaped Reese's, not the little rigid circle, but the little oblong-shaped ones. Boy, that is a Foster Moss says it's more peanut butter. It could be that's what it is. It's a little bit more, peanut butter to chocolate ratio. That could be what it is. Could be what it is. Morgan Forrest, we got Easter coming up. The Reese's eggs. Oh my gosh, yeah. Listen, I'm all about that. All about that. I sort of have a little bit of a sneaking theory that the eggs and the pumpkins are all essentially just the same piece of candy. They just put a different wrapper on it. But I do like this. I do like this. Paul Moon says the cool down's gone to food every day this week. Just keep in mind, the cool down is whatever y'all make it. I just simply read your comments. DT, this is actually pretty funny. He says that he and his wife exchange Valentine's cards in the grocery store. That way they can read them and just sort of put them back on the shelf. It's actually a really good idea, DT. I like that. Yeah, Roger Hall also mentioned that the proportions of the non-cup-shaped Reese's are just a little bit different. I believe that's why they taste so good. I believe you're right. At Christmas time, they also sell the giant Reese's, which is it comes with an insulin shot. Part of me kind of wants to know what it would be like just to sort of just devour one of those giant Reese's. I wouldn't mind doing that at some point in time. Randy Hall wondering if I bite the ears off the chocolate rabbits first. Sometimes. I also like the Hershey's, like the rabbits and like with the Hershey's that are sort of shaped like the rabbits and the Santas and things like that. I really like those too. South Georgia Dog, going back to the Georgia scheduling thing, says, if top teams move away from cupcake games, how will that affect those small programs that, as we're told, rely on big checks for taking a beating? Well, it's going to impact them horribly. That if Georgia and teams like that didn't pay the FCS level teams, those teams would probably cease to exist. And I have a sneaking suspicion that there are going to be some teams that cease to exist. Like the one point I've been making kind of for a while now is that as we kind of talk about what's good for players and NIL and things like that and sort of moving into a compensation-based employment model, there are going to be fewer players. And, I mean, I think that's an unavoidable consequence of all of this. As the market moves towards something that's a little bit more efficient, there are just going to be fewer players. And so, so listen, if you're one of those guys that's sort of playing for UAB, you play for UAB. Like when you hear this talk of, let's make the players employees and let's take advantage of that revenue. What if you play for a program that doesn't generate any revenue? One of these days that a lot of these guys who've been told that all of this is for the players, all of this work, this sort of radical work to sort of reinvent college football, it's all been done with kind of, player empowerment in mind. But if the number of total players is reduced by about half, who's the real winner in that case? Who is really asking for some of this kind of stuff? Some of this stuff sort of feels like a problem or a solution in search of a problem. Because I don't know. And listen, I'm not going to say I'm going to sit here and just shed a bunch of crocodile tears if some of these Group of 5 teams stop fielding teams, or if a lot of these FCS teams stop fielding teams. I mean, I would maybe in some cases not even really notice, perhaps. But just watch this. The closer we get to players or employees, well, look at the league that has employees, the NFL. How many teams are there? There are 32. How many players do each of those teams have? 53. The idea there's going to be 100-something teams with 85 scholarship players on each, that is not what the employment future is going to bring. Now, I'm not saying that in itself is not a reason to do it, but just be very, very mindful of things that people think they know for sure. Let us see what else. Lucy Bowers Boykin never knew that they were different shaped Reese's. Yeah, Lucy, you're missing that now. You're missing that. That's really, it's really good. I'm not being funny. It's really good. Barry Watkins mentioning Werther's. I've seen those before, but I've never eaten those. Marshall Fleming says he doesn't eat sweets. They're not good for your waistline. Well, that is certainly true. If only I always consistently made the same health decisions. Let us see what else. Oh, yeah, Jerry Popham also had the same idea about going to the card shop, reading it, and then putting it back on the shelf. I don't mind that. That's good. That's a really good idea. Marshall Fleming says he still has abs. That's impressive. Tenille Calvino, thanks for checking in. We're glad you're here. Appreciate that. Good stuff. All right. A couple final comments, then we're all going to go. Back at DawgNation.com. Yeah, DT, funny stuff from him. DT also says the Georgia State coach has the demeanor of a head coach. Hard to imagine him going back to being an assistant. Maybe his doctor said he was going to have to some sort of health issue. Maybe that's the case. It's also probably better job security. Just the chasm between the haves and the have-nots is growing wide. I mean, if UCLA can't keep its head coach from becoming an assistant, then Georgia State certainly can't keep its from doing the same thing. Randy Hall mentioning that it would be great to have Reese's in the shape of college mascots, which it would be, but that also begs sort of an interesting question. It's like, Well, would you want to eat your favorite team's Reese's, or would you want to be like devouring the competition? It's a dilemma, right? It's sort of like a trolley problem, isn't it? Yeah, that's a little bit of a dilemma. If Reese's made mascot-shaped candies, would it be good to, sort of buy your team and show support to them that way? But that means you're also eating them. It's kind of like the M&M's commercial where, like, it's sort of understood that the M&Ms exist to be eaten by humans, and they're kind of trying to, like, deal with that existential crisis. Like, there's a lot going on in that commercial if you really think about it. This is sort of the same type of deal. Like, if they made hairy dog-shaped Reese's Cups, would we be wrong for wanting to eat them? Ponder that. All right, back on YouTube one more time. Morgan Forrest mentioning cheese curds. So I've never been to Wisconsin. Maybe that's part of the deal here. But I hear people talk about cheese curds. I've never actually eaten cheese curds. Never actually done that. Michael Wilson says, what do you think about college football? Talking about a 2-minute warning and possibly a 16-team playoff. I do feel like eventually they'll probably get to 16 teams. Everything eventually gets bigger. I think they'll probably get to 16 eventually. And I guess I'm not really against that. If you go from 16 to 32, maybe you're getting a little bit silly, but 16 team, I could probably live with that. The 2-minute warning is the dumbest thing in the world. It's just the dumbest thing in the world. All of this is about commercials. The whole idea of we're going to reduce the number of plays, shorten the games. The games didn't get shorter. There's just more room for commercials. And the 2-minute warning is the same type of deal. The 2-minute warning doesn't do anything for competition. I guess it stops the clock for the losing team, but theoretically that's not changing, the game very much. But it does, you're right there when the games are kind of getting to their best, one more chance to cram in another commercial. Oh my gosh. And listen, I'm not against free market stuff and things like that, but make your money. I'm not necessarily against that, but I'm also not going to be happy about things that are sort of only done with, multinational corporations in mind. And that is pretty clearly the type of thing that benefits the fans, not one iota. Not one iota does that benefit the fans. That's all about commercials. Let us see what else. Johnny Surf Dog says, I think our roster numbers are pretty good for the spring. Sometimes G-Day gets limited because not enough healthier offensive linemen running backs. Well, I know they were really shorthanded on running backs a year ago, so maybe that will be the case here this year. Stick D says, is it too early for a Georgia-Bama score prediction? No, I like probably like Georgia in that spot. We do have a spread out there on that, 3.5. I'd say my early lean is on Georgia. All right, anything else? All right, we're going to go for now. Really good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that to do good work for you, including plumbing emergency, water heater goes out, cold showers. No. Use RS Andrews to get that water heater replaced. In many cases, the same day. So make sure you find them online, rsandrews.com. They bring the cool down to us each and every day. I love our comments. I love our time together, the interaction we have. We could not do it if not for RS Andrews. So thank to them for doing all of that. And thank you all for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.